Hi, and welcome to Pathways to Tertiary, or P2T. P2T is an online series of events which has been co-designed by the National Disability Coordination Program, or NDCO for short. P2T is a virtual opportunity for students and those who support them, including parents, caregivers, teachers, and other stakeholders, with access to critical and timely information about preparing for tertiary education. This series provides an opportunity to connect with TAFE, university disability practitioners, and other industry specialists so that students with disability can experience a smoother transition from secondary school into tertiary education. Before we commence today's session, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. In the spirit of reconciliation, the NDCO program acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Before we get started, there is some important housekeeping information I would like to bring to your attention. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel. I'll bring them up during the presentation, and we will also have time for questions at the end. An Auslan interpreter and captioner have been provided for today's session. The captions can be accessed within Zoom as well as via separate URL if you are using a second device. The link to access this will now be placed into the chat box. Please also be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the platform shortly after the session, so that those who are unable to attend the live session can still access the information at a later time. At the conclusion of this session, a link to a survey will be placed in the chat box. Please take the time to complete the survey and provide us with feedback on the event. Thank you for attending, and I hope you enjoy the session.
Yerdumarang, Mayingalang, Yonadi, Toran Dixon, Nadu Banigu, Gubara, Radri Nurmbanga, Nina Nangira, Duinya, Gaidalang, Nadu Banigu, Gubara, Muyulangalang, Maradubu, Yalabu, Nadu Banigu, Gubara, Biambugu, Manangu, Wuragabinya.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today for part 2 of the Pathways to Tertiary online series, Talking Transition, information for parent, carers and guardians. The session aims to provide practical information to prepare your young person for a pathway to tertiary education. The presentation will be delivered by NDCO's Tracy Heatherton and myself, Cynthia Fitzpatrick. We have designed the presentation to allow for a longer Q&A session at the end where we can answer as many questions as possible. So we'll begin our presentation now. Today's session will include information on what is effective transition planning, the value and role of parents in transition planning, the Create Your Future short films that were developed by the New South Wales NDCO program, and the instructions on how to access these films will be available in the resource toolbox. The top 10 tips for parents and a resource toolbox with information to support you and your young person's transition journey. The link to the toolbox will be added to the chat box later in the presentation. Now I will hand you over to Tracy, who will begin today's conversation.
Thanks, Cynthia. Welcome everyone to our session today. And I'd like to say thanks to Helen, our captioner, Chelsea and Tyson, who are our interpreters, and will be interchanging throughout this presentation. I'd like to make a note on the language, and it's not the swearing type, just that we use the term parent throughout this presentation for simplicity. We acknowledge and respect that you may be a parent, carer, guardian, or other family member or a mentor of a young person with a disability. So likewise, we use the term young person to refer to your son or daughter interchangeably. We acknowledge that the term son or daughter may not be appropriate to every person's individual circumstances. The second note is on the world of acronyms. One of the biggest adjustments parents will need to make is understanding the abbreviations often used, which are referred to as acronyms. To help you become more familiar with using common acronyms throughout this presentation, examples are Disability Advisor, DA, Disability Employment Service, DES, Registered Training Organisation, RTO, and the NDIS as a National Disability Insurance Scheme, to name a few. Thanks, Cynthia. So what is transition planning? In this context, we are referring to transition as a process of moving from secondary school to tertiary education. Tertiary education includes university, TAFE, private college, RTO, adult and community education, and apprenticeships and traineeships. Transition may start prior to finishing secondary school with a blend of vocational education and training and work, such as school-based apprenticeships, traineeships, or university bridging courses. So how can parents become more effective in helping their young person with transition planning? Start the conversation early and, where possible, involve the young person, helping them to discover likes, dislikes, interests. Involve personnel from both secondary and post strategies that reflect their individual preferences, their strengths, and longer-term vision. Incorporate activities which promote self-awareness, provide skill development opportunities throughout work experience and community activities. Promote access to up-to-date information about options. Help them to develop knowledge of supports available in post-school settings and how to access them. If you haven't been involved in your young person's transition planning to date, or you don't feel that it has been effective as it could be, it's a great idea to speak to staff at the school and raise any concerns you might have. Remember, at the beginning, your role is likely to be one of direct involvement and will become less hands-on and more facilitative as your young person leaves school and enters post-secondary study. However, especially for young people with disability, you are likely to remain a vital part of the support network they need to get by in post-secondary settings. So this is a diagram that represents the key tertiary pathways after school. It's important to keep an open mind during early transition planning and explore a wide range of possibilities. The diagram shows many mainstream options and some only available to people with disability. It's important to remember, if you're a young person who's registered with the NDIS, ensure that their post-school pathways are identified in their plan, including any necessary supports to achieve their tertiary goals. And this map is actually in our resource kit. So I'm just going to share a transition conversations and how they might take place. So most likely the majority of parents have already had an informal conversation with their young person about transition through natural dialogue or storytelling. We may not realise that these conversations may start to take shape with our children from a very early age. When we pose that famous question, what do you want to do when you grow up or get older? Often we don't build on these because we know the first few years, young ones are changing their mind almost weekly. In my experience as a full-time carer for our grandson who has a disability, we are frequently talking about his interests, his likes, dislikes, and reflecting back how he has changed his mind over the years, from wanting to be an AFL footballer to more recently wanting to be a cartoonist or gaming developer, to a gaming developer. The early conversations were more an acknowledgement of their interests as age appropriate. However, his more recent interest is something we are building on in our conversations, such as subjects. he's choosing subjects he's choosing at school, extracurricular activities, and interest groups with his friends and or his community. We discuss his abilities with his teachers and or career advisors to see how we can support him. We work out ways that we can build on his knowledge and skills in a more natural way that doesn't involve too much pressure, such as attending exhibitions, library, workshops in our community. Some are delivered online, which allow him to be more involved in learning remotely. We don't allow this to consume all of our conversations, as we want him to feel free to change his mind and or have other interests that will add value to his personality. We use very common phrase with our grandson, and that is, if you find a job that you like, you'll never do a hard day's work in your life. So how early? Well, it's recommended 14 or 15 years of age, but I think there's nothing wrong with it being earlier. I have known students who changed their mind in year 12 and it hasn't had a huge impact. However, not having any career conversations, leaving the decision until year 11 or 12 can be unsettling for the student to contend with. Tying in post-school transition plus other personal growth aspects can prove limiting for the young person. There is no hard and fast answer to how frequent career conversations should take place. It should be a natural progression of building on your young person's interests. Listen for cues where possible. Take the time to support their growth in understanding where their interests, their likes, dislikes, etc. are coming from. Have they been exposed to specific industries or community activities? Finally, we don't want to tell you how it will work for you, as everyone's journey is different.
I'm at uni in my final semester and I'm doing a Bachelor of Early Childhood Education and Care, birth to 5. I have Asperger's syndrome with moderate hearing loss and 2 chronic illnesses. I don't really view my conditions as disabling. I think of them as a different way of thinking, feeling, sensing and living. I love working with kids, so I find the course really interesting. I'm so close to finishing and I'm really excited that I'm almost done. There are challenges and I work with and adapt to these every day. I have a disability coordinator who discusses with me my needs and reasonable adjustments and then organises support staff, resources or equipment as I need them. I might need note-taking or an Auslan interpreter or a tutor or reformatting of information to help me understand. I see the counsellor every week to help me address issues with like time management and executive functioning and a lot of stress that I can have sometimes. Like I've learned about my rights, my responsibilities and some of my strengths, and these are all things that'll help me in life after study. At the moment I'm doing an internship, which is a really hands-on way to get experience. I get to put my theory that I've learned at uni into practice and it's helping me learn how to do the work properly. I've got really high goals and I take small steps every day towards achieving these. My advice to people with a disability who want to further their education is go for it. That's what I've done, and don't let anything stop you. The support is out there to help you.
The top 10 tips getting young people with disability ready for study and work. A guide for parents. This workbook was developed by the Western Sydney University NDCO program, using evidence from research and best practice, and with input from a wide variety of stakeholders. This resource forms a part of the Get Ready series, which also includes a workbook for young people with disability, a workbook for young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disability. And you will find a link to this workbook in the resource toolbox. The top 10 tips. Tip number 1 is to get ready early. Starting transition planning and activities as early as possible is a top priority and can make a huge difference to the success of the transition journey and to your young person achieving their goals. Tip number 2, get the big picture. Take a look at the bigger picture, including the many upcoming changes for your young person, you as a parent, and the whole family as you move through this transition. It's also time to start looking at your young person's interests, longer-term goals, and how their disability may affect their future study. Tip number 3, get connected. Make connections with your son or daughter about their future study, what they would like to do, and what help they would like or need from you after school. Offer your support. Also talk to people at your young person's school, at the various post-school settings and in your own networks about getting through your young person's transition successfully and how to help them reach their goals. Tip number 4, get to know the options. Things are very different from when most of us left school, especially for your young person with disabilities. Research and keep an open mind about the different post-school options and help your young person identify realistic ones for them. Tip number 5, get them skilled up. Identify the skills your young person will need for future study. Which skills do they already have and which new ones will they need? Do what you can at home to help them to develop these new skills. We will have a short break now while we watch another Create Your Future short film of Abdullah story when we then we'll return with the final 5 top 10 tips.
My name is Abdullah. My left side was weak and my right side is strong. My disability, typical cerebral palsy. Long time ago, I had my left foot to have operation. Still cannot walk because my foot was twisted and it wouldn't walk properly. So we had the operation to my left leg to make it straight. What I love is I love playing games. I am a cosplayer, and my favorite is dressing up as a Jedi and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Everyone's looking at me and they liked it. Yeah, I think my parents has supported me and encouraged me.
He loves the hobby that he found. House Comic-Con and making all these costumes. Really, I see him in a different light than I ever saw him before.
It's very difficult to find jobs after the high school. We are looking for work or study at college. We will study at TAFE. Last year we are studying at Bankstown Private College in business study. And there was a lot of people there to study in Excel, to study in Words and spreadsheets. That's where I like to work on the computer.
I tried to find an agency, an employment agency that would help him. They provided assistance for him, but they said, no, it's better that we give this assistance to someone else who will benefit in the long run from it. I've always, been raised to speak up for what I believe. And I just didn't want my son to be left behind. So whatever I could do for him, I did, trying to get him into the correct place and get him to get the education that would help him for the rest of his life. And that took us about 10 to 15 years to get someone to give him the help that he needed. Yeah, it was very frustrating, very, very frustrating. Go out, get a job, and be independent and rely on himself. I'm not going to be here for him forever.
I work to every day, a cause, and keep me busy, and I need money for cosplay. So I found out myself. I'm proud of my work, and I'm proud of my costume, cosplay, happy with it.
There's a few costumes that he really looked very nice in. The Shazam with the cape.
She adjusts his cape.
Which one is my favorite? I'll say the Jedi. The Jedi.
My dream job is graphics designer, video game designer, and costume design.
I wasn't going to give up on my son. And my advice is that to keep going, help your child, don't give up.
We'll finish off the top 10 tips now. Tip number 6, get them to be organised. Being organised and managing time effectively can make a big difference when a young person enters a post-school education or training setting. This is a time for parents to start handing over responsibilities and helping their son or daughter learn and practice ways of organising their own affairs where possible. Tip number 7, get support. Think about where you can get support, the types of support you and your young person may need through this transition, and what type of support they may need in any study or training. Tip number 8, get involved. Get involved in any school-based transition planning meetings, discussions, and activities relating to life after school. Research shows that when parents are involved in the transition, their young person has an easier transition and achieves more after school. Also, help your young person get involved in activities that give them new and different experiences and build up their skills and confidence for the future. Tip number 9, get to know their rights and responsibilities. Help your young person learn about their rights in education and how they are protected. Find out how your role will change as your young person comes of adult age and legal status, and how this will affect your involvement in their future education or training. Tip number 10, get them confident. Encourage your son or daughter to practice taking responsibility, handling constructive criticism, and standing up for themselves effectively and non-aggressively. Having these life skills are essential to building your young person's resilience and ability to cope in the new adult situations they will soon face. I'd like to introduce our last film now of Belinda, who shares her story. Then Tracy will be back to talk about the resource toolbox.
There are challenges every day, but I get through them. I work in the post-school options, education and vocational sector, and I work with people with disability. Having a chronic health condition, mobility limitations and mental health condition means that I need some support with work and with study. I love my job and I love the students I'm working with. My disability issues are acquired. So at first I didn't have anything to disclose, but then I became ill and I disclosed to my boss. It was a positive experience. I have reasonable adjustments in the workplace to help me with my organisational and planning deficits, my physical access and the hours that I work on duty. I'm also studying for a doctorate at uni in special education and autism, and I'm doing this by distance. Initially, I didn't receive support at uni. I thought I'd be okay, but then I became unwell
and I made contact with the disability coordinator at the uni, who provided me with resources and some support on how to cope with uni. Many people don't disclose, and I can understand why. People can feel like a sense of shame. They're often afraid of discrimination, that they mightn't get the job or they mightn't get the promotion. Employers don't need to know everything about your disability. They need to know enough just to make the workplace safe for you and for others. Everyone with a disability should know their rights, how they're protected, when they should disclose, how they should disclose, so that they can fully participate in work and study. The support's out there.
Collated resources, which the link has been added to the chat box, and you'll find the information we have presented today and other useful links, such as the Get Ready for Study and Work series of books, access to short films, what's the difference between school, TAFE and universities, which identifies each of those areas, and plus additional links to support you in your young person's transition journey. You can access them directly from the website. So over to you, Cynthia. Thanks.
So that brings us to the end of our presentation tonight, and we would like to open it up now and for some questions.
Sorry, we've had a question come in on the Q&A section, either Tracy or Cynthia, whoever knows best. And this is from a parent. Where am I able to find out the options available for my son with a disability? I tried his school, but I didn't get the information I need. Are there programs or an advisor I can reach? My son is nearly 15 years old, but full of potential. I tried the disability agency, but they thought he is too young. We would like to start planning as early as possible.
I'll let you answer that, Trace.
Sorry, so you've tried the school. Well, what I actually do is look for what's been offered in terms of expos and career fairs to get information. Certainly, being 15, you should be able to access your local TAFE for information.
Another question from the Q&A section. How can I, as a parent, remain informed of the pathways to tertiary for my special needs child?
Well, as Tracy touched on earlier, you can discuss the options with a teacher or a career advisor. You can attend career expos, attend information sessions like this. If your child has an NDIS plan, you can subscribe to the NDIS to stay informed about possible pathway options. There are also credible career websites you could have a look at. Some are located in the the resource toolbox that you'll have access to. Can you think of any others, Trace?
Oh, I think you've covered, Swag, maybe open days at the TAFEs and universities as well is another good one. Yeah.
And we've got another one. Sorry, they're coming in thick and fast. This is excellent. Should my daughter disclose her disability to TAFE?
Well, they tell us one of the hardest decisions a person with a disability needs to make is who to tell what about their disability, and the disability standards for educations They clarify the obligations of education and training providers and seeks to ensure that students with disability can access and participate in education on the same basis as other students. Disclosing means intentionally telling other people about a disability or chronic medical condition. And disclosure of a disability is required if you seek reasonable adjustments. You will need to provide a report from a medical practitioner, psychologist, or another accredited health specialist. And the provision of support will be based on the health practitioner's report and personal negotiations between you and the disability practitioner and or the trainers.
Somebody in Q&A has suggested that TAFE could be a pathway to university from HSC, a jumping stone. Is that correct?
That is correct. I didn't think of that before.
And you'll find that that pathway is becoming more favourable as TAFEs and universities link together. And I know as cost-cutting measures for anyone, even in mainstream, they'll do as much as they possibly can at TAFE and then transfer over to university with credits, credit transfers. There's also the mature age access that you can go through to university as well. It's still 25. Once you turn 25, you can apply for automatic entry. But there are obviously some specialist programs. You can apply through the bridging courses, which was I mentioned earlier. Those bridging courses like CSU and the Trobe, so they might have a direct pathway that's recognised for some. So courses around, I think it's occupational therapy and dietitians and stuff, and some business courses. You can actually apply, do a bridging course and apply direct entry in through that way. I'm not saying it's with every university. I think they've all got their own pathways. Yeah.
I've had a question for a definition. Could you please tell me what reasonable adjustments are?
Yes, well, as a matter of fact, we can. Reasonable adjustments, they're actually a legislative term, and in this context for tertiary education, it refers to a measure or action taken by an education provider to enable learners with disability to participate in education and training on the same basis as a person without a disability. Students with disability are a part of the general population, and they may choose or choose not to declare their disability upon enrolment. However, to successfully complete their tertiary education, they must meet the inherent requirements of a course that they are studying. And some examples of an reasonable adjustment is, they may need a note taker, they may need additional time for submitting their work or for sitting exams. They may request copies of notes or PowerPoint slides or electronic versions of resources. There's quite a broad range of adjustments that can be negotiated. Can you think of any more, Trace?
Oh, there's probably lots, but yeah, not at this point.
Yeah, it's best to talk to staff.
Situation is different, isn't it?
Yeah.
And a lot of those adjustments actually vary from secondary school to TAFE to university, and what's required to prove that they need reasonable adjustments. I think secondary schools are great, but they're quite limiting, and normally you have to go in, they have to submit a whole heap of paperwork to the Board of Studies, whereas TAFEs in universities, I mean, change again. And all this information is actually the comparisons between all, are in what's the difference between TAFE university and secondary schools, which lay out different situations.
And that is included in the resource toolbox.
Okay, we've got another one. Do you have a list of universities which have good support for our kids?
And I just think it all boils down at the end of the day is, different experiences, and what might work out for one student may not work out for another. What university may work out for one student may not work out for another student, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and that's I said exactly like that as well. They're all different. In different states, there's also, even though we have like a federal system of universities, each state runs their universities a little bit different, as well as titles of staff. So from disability advisors to disability coordination officers to disability liaison officers, inclusive and diverse teams and support teams that work within those universities. So it's really, I think it's a word of mouth thing too, but now I think over the last few years, universities have become, they've played catch up. They're becoming quite good at retention of students with disabilities. Probably would like to see more people, young people, access university. But at the end of the day, I think the retention has increased over the last 2 or 3 years. Not to exactly where we would like it to be, but certainly heading in some of the right direction.
And it's also important before the student enrolls in a course to go and have a talk to the disability staff first, just to get a feel, learn what supports may be provided. And that's a good way to get, you'll get a bit of a sense about what university might be the right fit for your young person.
I think it's worth mentioning too what's happened with COVID, and so much has gone online learning, which is, I don't know why, but a lot of universities have actually shared that they've been surprised at how a lot of their students with disabilities have really hung in there working online. And the other end of that other people, mainstream, accessing those courses, have started to relate and realise that, that having people with disabilities around them has actually helped them learn how to cope through an environment that has isolated so many of us. So I think it's, yeah, we're on the right track. We just still got a lot of work to do. And you're right, Cynthia, it's about every individual is different, and universities are different, but certainly just reframing that, reinforcing that the need for students, for families to actually go along to their university and see what they've got to offer. That's if they're in a situation where they have one or more universities close to them. Yeah. Got any more there, Leanne?
Nope, we've dried up.
We've dried up. That's not a bad thing, is it?
Well, it's certainly dinner time and everyone's probably had a long day. So that will bring us to a close of our presentation tonight. Make sure you grab the link to the resource toolbox out of the chat box, I think it's in. And thank you again for joining us tonight. You'll find a whole range of resources in there, and I'm sure it will answer most of your questions. So go and have a look, and we'll say good night for now. And don't forget to tune into the next part of Pathways to Tertiary this time next week, on Wednesday next week.
Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks, everybody, for your patience. Good evening.